to the Food Startups Podcast, connecting the opaque world of food startups.
Hello and welcome to episode number 68 of the Food Startups Podcast. This is your host, Matt Aaron, and today we have a guest that is going to shed some light on world agriculture and a high-level view and some opportunities that are going to come into fruition based on a number of factors going on in the world. And it's not just a Joe Schmo. This is a legendary investor, Jim Rogers. If you're not familiar with him, he started the Quantum Fund with George Soros, has had a lot of success in commodities. He started his own commodity index back at the end of the 20th century, and he's also achieved 3 Guinness World Records, 2 of them being round-the-world trips. Some things I learned speaking with him and reading 2 of his books were the following. One, I would say that he was able to recognize trends well before anyone else, doing tons and tons of research and not taking the common, I guess you could say dogma, but the common beliefs of everyone at face value. He went and researched, and he would find that what everyone else was thinking was not the case, and he was able to invest and profit from it. At the same time, I thought it was cool that he would recognize these trends so quickly, and his timing would actually be early. So he kind of had to adjust and make sure he didn't invest too early in certain trends because he saw them so much sooner than the rest of the world, for lack of a better word. Another thing is history repeats itself. He talks about there's a number of times, you can talk about like the dot-com crash recently, but there's so many times in crashes in history where we don't learn from history and we repeat the same mistakes, like the dot-com crash, like, earnings per share and other key metrics for investing were ignored. And as a result, all these companies went broke because people didn't pay attention to, the key, metrics of financial health. So, he talks about that today in the episode. He talks about learning to think at a deeper, more profound level. And, as we talked before about Charlie Munger and his mental models, I see a huge similarity there about having a deeper, profound thought and understanding and really being able to link key concepts from various disciplines. Besides that, I think you're going to find that he's not afraid to share his opinion, and he's made many, many correct calls and profited from them, like, Fannie Mae and the 2008 crash. And so it's really an honor to see what he thinks about agriculture and why there are so many opportunities in it. And really, don't get an MBA, but become a farmer. So without further ado, here is the episode. Jim, thank you so much for coming on today. We're pleased to have you on the show. And I wanted to go right into the first question, which is kind of a really interesting anecdote that I got from your book, Street Smarts. And I'm going to paraphrase it. But basically, Lamborghini started out as a tractor company. And then obviously they made the incredible sports cars that we know today. And you talked about how, Wall Street, the typical, hotshot stockbroker buys a Lamborghini. And you mentioned in the book that soon farmers are going to be buying the Lamborghinis, and they will employ ex-Wall Street guys who will drive the tractors. So I guess my question is, if you could help us explain that, why are you bearish on Wall Street and bullish on agriculture?
Well, Matt, throughout history, we've had long periods when the people who produce real goods, agriculture, whatever, miners, have been sort of in charge, and then followed by long periods when the financial types were in charge, followed again by, the people who produce real goods in charge. Well, we've had 30 years or so of the financial types being on top of the world, but many things are changing in the financial world, negative for the financial world. And so I can see that we're going to have problems there, just as we have had throughout history. When I first went to Wall Street, it was a backwater. Nobody wanted to go there, or the City of London, which is the financial sector of the UK. Nobody wanted to go there except the idiot son. Well, I guess I was the idiot son because I really, really, really wanted to go to the financial world. We've had 30 years. As I said, there are many negatives now developing in finance. We can get into them if you want to. At the same time, we've had 30 years of disaster for agriculture worldwide, as you well know, and as the listeners well know. This has not been a good 30 years. Things have been so bad that the average age of farmers in America is 58. In Japan, it's 66. In Canada, it's the oldest in recorded history. In Australia, it's 58. And the highest rate of suicide in the UK is in agriculture. Millions of Indian farmers have committed suicide in the last decade or so. This has been a terrible place to be. More people in America study public relations than study agriculture. So you can see we're running out of farmers, and unless something happens, we're not going to have any food or any clothes at any price. As I said, this has happened before. The world somehow adjusts and adapts, and life goes on. It's going to turn so that agriculture becomes more profitable, more exciting to attract management, labor, and capital, and the farmers are going to be rich. And as I said, things are turning against finance, so those guys are going to be driving tractors. The smart ones, they're going to be driving taxis or tractors. The smart ones who learn how to drive tractors so they can work for the farmers will be driving the Lamborghinis.
Gotcha. Okay. And for people who are not familiar, why do you think the financial sector, especially in the U.S., is in decline?
Well, we can start with a few facts. In 1958, America produced 5,000 MBAs per year, and the rest of the world produced none. Last year, America produced 200,000 MBAs, and the rest of the world produced tens of thousands more. So competition is now up a great deal from where it has been over the past few decades. In the financial community now, there's a lot of debt. When I went to Wall Street, or even in banks 20, 30, 40 years ago, there was very little debt. It just was not done for many reasons. Most of Wall Street was made up of partnerships, and the partners didn't want to risk going bankrupt, or getting wiped out, so they wouldn't have a lot of debt. Likewise, the banks had suffered greatly, so the regulators wouldn't let them have a lot of debt, and they didn't want a lot of debt anyway. So now you have a period with huge amounts of competition and lots of debt. Plus, you now have governments around the world and regulators. Everybody's sort of down on financial types and bankers now. Read the newspapers, watch TV, watch the internet. They're passing new regulations, new taxes, new laws all the time to limit or punish or curtail the ease and the success of banking and finance. So you have the society and government against you. You have competition. You have huge debt. None of this existed before. And now we're going to enter a period. We're also in the stock markets and bond markets. We've had long period now of no declining markets, no bear markets. Over 6 years without a bear market in stocks. Over 30 years without a bear market in bonds. So believe it or not, they don't go on forever. Stock markets and bond markets don't go up forever. They cannot. So for many reasons, it's all coming together now that I'd rather be a farmer than be a stockbroker.
Gotcha. And Jim, you mentioned, I guess the quantum fund, and you've been involved with hedge funds, and the advantage with a hedge fund over a mutual fund is that you can be long or short, right? Which is essentially having the option to bet whether a company will go up or down, not just going up. And, agriculture, farmers, they usually have to be long. What can farmers do to protect themselves?
Well, many farmers can and have learned to hedge themselves. If cotton gets up too high, farmers can go ahead and sell futures in the market to hedge themselves, or actually go ahead and sell their crop when they think it's too high. That's the main thing that farmers can do to take advantage of when things might go down.
And Jim, sorry to interrupt. I just want to clarify one thing. I realize onions is kind of its own example, but there's a lot of commodities, especially people that are working with companies not that big, that aren't on the futures market. Is that correct?
Oh, that is correct. That is absolutely correct. There are at least at least 20 that I can think of off the top of my head. And I know there are a lot more than that trade somewhere. Pepper, you can trade pepper, in Asia, not in the U.S., but there's plenty of things that you can trade in the futures markets. Not everything, I guess not everything. So sure, that's exactly right. That's a good point. But for many farmers, or most farmers, there are ways to hedge yourselves in the futures markets. And even if you're growing carrots, say, which does not have a futures market, you probably know a lot about agriculture, and you can find things that you can hedge yourself with, or you'll know what your neighbors are doing, or you'll know where there are opportunities to sell something else in the futures market to protect yourself and to hedge yourself. But nothing is easy, and many people will have to struggle or do research or homework to find ways to protect themselves. Other time-honored things are don't get a lot of debt unless you really know what you're doing. There's nothing wrong with debt if you can control it and you know what you're doing. If the neighboring farm comes up and you can buy it, even if it means a lot of debt, debt, but you know, for whatever reason, that you can make a lot of money. Sure, there's nothing wrong with that. But debt has ruined many, many, many people throughout history. So just be sure you know what you're doing and be careful.
Great. Okay. Now moving on. So I found this pretty interesting. So you mentioned if the price of copper goes up, not many know it right away. And again, I'm quoting from Street Smarts. But if prices of wheat and sugar go up, everyone knows it that day. And that leads to social unrest in Tunisia, Egypt, Syria, Yemen. You mentioned with rising food prices, we will see more discontent, more governments collapse, and more countries disintegrate. So I guess you also mentioned that disintegrate means into more countries. And in your book that you wrote to your daughters, which I'll also link on the website, you said 100 years from now, there will be probably anywhere between 300 and 400 sovereign nations on this earth, almost twice as many as there are now. So I guess it's a two-part question. One, why with food commodities, why they will lead to social unrest, and I realize it's not the only reason, but why that's one major factor into the number of countries maybe doubling in the next century or so.
Well, first, whenever there's unrest or disquiet or unhappiness in a country, often a spark comes along to set it off. And one of the historic sparks that come along and hit people or countries is food. Because if everybody's unhappy and smoldering with discontent, even if it's under the surface, suddenly, if food prices go up, their incomes aren't going up, and then their wives are unhappy, their children are unhappy, everybody's unhappy. And it's pretty much across the board because everybody knows when the price of food goes up and their discontent gets worse. And that has often led to problems. In America, they started taxing tea. Well, that set off a spark because tea was one of the basic food commodities of America in those days. And so the English government said, we're going to make it more expensive. Well, the rest of that story. And this has happened in many countries. When food prices suddenly get higher, it's a spark that goes off. And just in the past decade or two, we've already had countries starting to break up. Most of the countries in the world right now, if you look at the map, the geography is something of an accident. The Soviet Union was a bit of a historic accident, but many countries are a bit of an accident. Canada, not suggesting it's going to break up or anything, but Canada is this vast wilderness. Nobody knew what was there. And the English said, well, this is it, and this is a country now. But even Canada has gigantic differences within the country. They're there for historic reasons. That does not mean it's there for logical reasons. And again, I'm not suggesting they're going to break up, but in the past few years, you see that many Scots have wanted to get out of the UK. You see that right now in Catalonia, in Spain, the Catalonians want to get out of Spain. They've just had an election where the people who want to withdraw won the election. There are many places like that. You've had Yugoslavia break up into 6 countries in the last few years. Czechoslovakia is now 2 countries. It's broken up. Sudan is now 2 countries. Ethiopia is now 2 countries. You're already starting to see some of these things happen around the world. There are movements in many countries, even in the U.S., there are movements of people who want to pull out of the U.S. There's a strong movement in Texas at the moment and some other places where they want to pull out of the U.S. So these historic accidents, many of them are going to break up, partly because we cannot really control them. One of the reasons the Soviet Union broke up, other than the fact that communism was a fraud and could not work, was because it was too big. It was not manageable. People want to feel like they can understand or control where they are. And the Soviet Union was so big, Moscow was 10 or 12 or 13 time zones away, depending on where you lived. And so people had no concept of who was governing them, what was going on, and they had no control. People like to think that they know their neighbors, can control their religion, their language, their food, whatever it happens to be. And these countries, which mainly many of them are historic accidents, I won't say accidents, but a result of history, which is no longer valid, are going to break up, especially with communications being what it is these days. It's easier to spread discontent and anger and get followings.
Right on, yeah. And so, one thing I noticed in reading up for this interview is you have a really strong understanding of history and using that to try to make predictions about the future. It's interesting, too, because I was thinking about Gandhi, how he made the march, and that was all because of salt, because the prices of salt were up and they didn't let their people take their own salt out of the ocean, which is kind of ridiculous when you think about it. So moving on here, I wanted to ask a little more of a, micro question. For those with limited capital, is there anything that comes to mind for you, Jim, of countries to go to or any big opportunities in the agricultural space?
Oh, sure. It's unlikely most people will do anything. I mean, I'm wildly optimistic about North Korea right now, especially agriculture in North Korea. That's difficult. I'm an American. I'd like to put a lot of money in North Korea, but as an American, that makes it very difficult. I'm a citizen of the land of the free, but we're not so free anymore, Matt. I assure you, we used to be, but we're not so free anymore. Other countries, some of the African countries, have fabulous opportunities for agriculture. Angola, which is a huge country, used to export food. Now they import food because they had a horrible civil war. That will change, obviously. Ethiopia has gigantic agricultural possibilities. Kazakhstan, out in the middle of Asia, has great agricultural possibilities, huge amounts of land, good weather. It could be a great agricultural nation again. Russia, before the communist revolution, Russia had a huge agricultural industry and production. That is now changing. They're trying to get it back. But there are plenty of nations around the world that have the soil, the land, the weather in order to produce a lot of agriculture. And some of those are going to be great opportunities again. And the land is not so expensive. I mean, if you buy land in Iowa, as you know, it's very expensive. If you buy land in Kazakhstan, it's not so expensive.
Right. And listen, I realize it's impossible to predict the future. You mentioned, some of those countries right there. But, two things. But with Russia, you did mention this in your book, and, your philosophy of traveling around the world and seeing things for yourself, not just depending on what people say. I do understand that there's the mob there, right? So you'd have to be pretty careful in Russia, as I would imagine. I guess North Korea is off limits. And then one other country that I was very interested in your book is Myanmar, which I guess is formerly known as Burma. And you mentioned that you, at least when you were talking about Botswana, how the next country you're really excited about, but because you're an American, it may be difficult to invest. And this was a couple years ago that you wrote the book, but are you still high on Myanmar, and have you had any chance to invest there?
No, very, very optimistic. It's now much easier for Americans to invest there. Laws have changed since the book was written, and it used to be one of the great agricultural nations of the world. Burma, in 1962, was the richest country in Asia. And then they closed off. They threw the foreigners out. And 50 years later, Myanmar was the poorest country in Asia. But that's now leading to opportunities. They're opening up again. Americans can go there and invest. And there are plenty of opportunities in places like that. If you find a country that's been closed or where there's been a war or something, when it's changing, it's usually a fantastic opportunity. Cuba might be right now for some people. For me, it's too small. There are only 10 million people, and everybody else is already poured in there. Since I'm a citizen of the land of the free, I was not allowed to do anything in Cuba while everybody else could. The Europeans, the Canadians, the Mexicans, everybody else was pouring in there, snapping up the good opportunities while we were excluded. But there are certainly places now, and there will be in the future, where a disaster is coming to an end, and they're great opportunities.
Great. All right. And now, Jim, final question. So as of the book, I guess I should say, you have 3 Guinness World Records. And I'm going to share this on our website at foodstarterspodcast.com/Jim Rogers. The really cool looking Mercedes that you drove around the world. And so 1, can you tell us a little bit about the car? And 2, what was the world record that you guys set?
Well, I went around the world on a motorcycle, and that was my second Guinness World Record. And I wanted to do it again because I spent 2 years going around the world on a motorcycle. But A, it wasn't enough for me, and B, the woman I went with really wanted to come home most of the time. So it was a great trip, a fantastic trip, but I knew I wanted to do more. So at the turn of the millennium, 1999, 2000, 2001, I decided to go again and spend more time this time. Nobody's ever ridden around the world at the turn of a millennium, or if they have, they didn't write about it anyway. Haven't been that many millenniums in history. So I decided to go again, but I wanted to go in a sports car since I had done it on a motorcycle. But you cannot go around the world in a sports car, Matt, because you have to have clearance. You need four-wheel drive. It's much better to have a diesel engine than a gasoline engine for many. The main reason, you can't always get gasoline, but you can always get diesel. So I had to build my own car in partnership with Mercedes. We took a Mercedes G-Wagon, which is their rugged SUV that they sell to the police and to the military. A diesel engine SUV with four-wheel drive. We took the body off of the G-Wagon, the SUV. And then we added the body from a Mercedes SLK, which is their small sports car. But the SLK had a retractable hardtop convertible. And I knew that if I was going to do this, I better have a hardtop because, a regular ragtop convertible can get slashed or broken into much easier. So quite by chance, Mercedes makes this SLK sports car with a retractable hardtop, and they make this rugged SUV. And to my astonishment, and probably to Mercedes' astonishment, the wheelbase was exactly the same. He didn't have to slice or cut anything up or extend anything, and it fit. The body of the SLK fit perfectly on the wheelbase of the chassis of the Mercedes G-Wagon. So took a lot of work and some money, but we put together this one-of-a-kind sports car. It's got high clearance. It's diesel engine. It's four-wheel drive. Then, since when the top is retracted, there's not much room in the trunk. Obviously, in any sports car, there's not much room in the trunk, but especially when you have the top retracted. So we had to build a special matching trailer for things like water, food, camping equipment, medical supplies, spare parts, stuff that we knew we would need. And we made it. And we made it. It was quite a lot of fun.
I bet, yeah. And again, I'm amazed that the SLK fit on the G-Wagon, but you can see it here in the picture. So great. Well, Jim, again, thank you so much for coming on our show. Learned so much today, and yeah, hope to have you back in the future.
Well, thank you, Matt. Me too. Please learn to drive a tractor if you don't know how.
All right.
Okay.
Hey guys, thanks so much for listening. And as always, if you have any questions or comments, find us online at foodstartupspodcast.com.